Hello and welcome to your reading. So this in the center is going to be Earth. This X is you on Earth, and this is a map of the sky, the moment you were born. That is this blue in the center is the map of the sky, the moment you were born. And then we have on this outer circle is the map of the sky at 6:02, that would be Eastern time, so 3:02 would be Pacific Standard Time, and then I think Hawaii would be 3, 2, either 1 or midnight that this eclipse be exact for you. Just a note about that. In the Hellenistic astrology, they're always saying to don't look at it, don't be out in the eclipse and all of this. In the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, where I studied mostly from, the founder of that school is always talking about watching eclipses and that he always goes and I've always gone too to view the eclipse, especially the lunar eclipses, because almost everywhere we'll be able to see them, and it's easier to see them the closer they are to the south and north node. So because this eclipse, I believe, is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 16. I think it's only 3 degrees away, so it should be quite visible if you want to have a peek at that. So I was just double checking the degrees of the eclipses. Give me just a second. I know it's at 16 degrees. I don't know why I feel compelled to double check. You know what? I have the chart right here. See, on this chart that we're looking at, it doesn't have the numbers of the degrees. So the 8th of November is at 6 degrees. So sun and moon are at 16 degrees. The nodal axis is at 13 degrees. So this should be quite visible for you at midnight or at 1 a.m. if you want to go have a peek at it. And just to tell you a little secret, one of the eclipses that I viewed was what gave me the idea to write my book. And it was deep and profound, like watching through the hours of the changing moon. I was just outside, just walking and running around the cliffs, and nobody was there because it was before the sun came up. So the same wee hours of the morning. And I feel like you really get the light of the sun and the moon. And with this eclipse, it's so powerfully packed because of the story of what's going on with Venus and the story of Mercury going also into the glare of the sun to then meet up with Venus in the underworld, which, if you haven't had a chance to read the Inanna story, I can show you the book that I have, which is just for a fact, you're going to this book. It's in my bed because I've been reading it every chance I get. And it is just so perfect for our times and for femininity and womanhood and everything. So it's called Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, Stories and Hymns from Sumer. So it's a Sumerian myth or story. Very, very good, especially while Venus is in the underworld. Okay, so there's that. Let's go ahead and get peeking into your chart. And I've also just pulled up the dates. So if you see me looking at this, you'll know why. It's the dates for next year's eclipses too. So we can kind of get an idea of first how the new moon eclipse, which happened on the 25th of October at 2 degrees of Scorpio. Let's see. At 2 degrees of Scorpio, I would like to also have a chart without that biwheel because I see that you have Mars and Pluto and your oh, that's right. We talked about this today. So you're just getting out of your Uranus position, which is a major um, life initiation known as mid transition. I should pause this video so you don't have to just be waiting for me. Let me pause. Okay, so I'm so glad that I did take the time to look because that eclipse on the 25th of October, which was a new moon. So that new moon has a 6-month initiation process for everybody in the area of the chart, right around 2 degrees of Scorpio. Now, that will also impact whatever's around 2 degrees of Taurus, and that's for everybody. That the new moon, the 25th, being a solar eclipse. And the other thing, it is normally it's going to be a 6-month period. And it is, and it's also ends up being more like a whole year period. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. Normally, it would be 6 months. This time it's a year because next year's eclipses are unusual in the sense that it's see, normally because the nodal axis will be about 18 months in one, it'll be in one axis. So Taurus, then it'll shift and it'll be, the next is going to be Aries Libra. Well, next year we're going to have an eclipse on the axis of Aries and Libra, and then on Taurus and Scorpio, and then on Aries and Libra, and then on Taurus and Scorpio. So whatever is taking place now is going to also be working throughout the entire year, essentially. So just keeping that in mind. That also because last year in November, we had our first eclipse in this axis, there is a general theme that, I would also look on your, let's look, I'm looking at your chart now. So there's nothing in the axis of the eclipse in November was around 26, 27 degrees. I think it was, I want to say it was 27 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. And that would have been in some way initiating. Yeah, it was, I believe, 27 degrees. And that was November 2021. We got a kickoff into this area of your life. It was sparking up. Oh my gosh, it's your relationship axis. So last year, when this started in November, it would have been initiating something in your seventh house of who are you, in the sense of who are you in relationship to me. So the seventh house will often deal with partnerships. It can be your most primary partnership with your partner, your lover, your co-inhabitor. I don't know if you guys live together, but with your person. And it can also be just relationships in general, because the seventh house also is something called open enemies, which is basically people who you have loved and been vulnerable with, and they know you. And then something happens and you guys don't know each other anymore, but they still know you just enough to be a nuisance in your life, where it's so awkward and uncomfortable. Open enemies is like people who you know and used to like, or it can even be those who just don't wish you well. And you also kind of just don't wish them well, but you have, sometimes we have to be in relationships, say if it's family members or sisters, cousins, uncles, family members who you like wish they didn't know you, you know you just enough to always remind you of the thing that they didn't like, or stuff like that can come up in the seventh house. It's called open enemies. Open enemies can also be like people who you used to love, who this happens when somebody like they get in a fight, they break up, one calls the other one's boss and bad mouths them like, "Oh, did you know she's doing X, Y, and Z?" And kind of trying to stir up trouble, and they can't actually get you in trouble because they know so much about you. So stuff like that may have been coming up or being, and doesn't have to be just because it's because that eclipse is activating your relationship axis. And I'm still talking about November of 2021 because this is when the whole themes got started, and then it just kind of keeps going on until, let me tell you those exact dates, and then we'll get into the specifics of your chart. So the April 20th eclipse, that's going to be Aries. May 5th, we're going to have a Scorpio lunar eclipse at 15 degrees Scorpio. And then there's a Libra one. And then October 28th, Taurus lunar eclipse at 5 degrees Taurus. So I want to just make a little note. It's going to be at 5. I don't know if I can draw very good, just so I can remember that. That's going to be in October of 2023. And then need to check what is at 15 degrees of Scorpio, but just because I see your ascendant there, I want to make sure. Oh my God, your ascendant is 14. So 15, I'm just writing at over the asteroid named, which happens to be at 17 degrees of Scorpio when you were born. Okay, so let's start with, well, I already kind of covered a little bit of the November 2021, that something may have been initiated with your 7th house. I'm thinking because we have the same relationship axis, except for ours are flip-flop. So my rising sign is Taurus. So that 27 degrees, that first eclipse happened on my, like, right at my ascendant. And so we have it flip-flop. So I'm like wondering what happened for me. And it was a lot about relationships, but that whole relationship axis is being worked during this eclipse season. So just think back to what was going on in your life in November, and it may not be something that you were aware of, because Scorpio is very tricky and not tricky in the sense of like Gemini Mercury tricky, but in the sense of things happening under the surface that we may never be fully aware of what really went down. But something started getting into motion in November of 2021. And then looking now at this eclipse, the one that happened on the 25th of October, your Mars is at 2 degrees of Scorpio, and you have Pluto at 6. So you have a Pluto Mars conjunction natally, which is going to bring a lot of depth and mystery and power to the form of the masculine who you are attracted to, and more importantly, to your inner masculine. It makes your Mars in Scorpio be this really deep shamanic healing, killing. With Scorpio, planets in Scorpio, there's healing and killing. They go together. It's like death and regeneration. And with Mars, especially that warrior aspect, with being so close to Pluto, there is a sense, and because Mars in Scorpio always is going to have this intensity to it that is wants to just go straight to the point. It's very carnal, I think is the word. Very sensual, almost on the verge of those ones who do the whips and chains kind of, you know what I mean? Like it can be very passionate, but with Mars and Scorpio next to Pluto, it's also can be, maybe you have thought like, hey, let's try, who knows what you're into, but like let's try this with like leather whips and chains and all of that kind of thing. That is what really brings my, and not only that, it's not only that, because it is also that, but it's also that assertiveness and the ability to speak out about things like child slavery and sex workers and things that people don't really want to talk about. Mars in Scorpio is the person who's going to talk about that. Okay, so the 25th eclipse, the solar eclipse that happened, was exact on your Mars. So that activated your Mars and your Pluto, and this is going to be activating it as an initiation, passing a threshold to something new and deep and intense, transformative, that will be working for the next 6 months and the next 6 months, and also for that year, because in October of 2023, the eclipse is going to be going through, by opposition, though, it's going to be again, um, that will be a full moon, because that's a lunar eclipse that's happening on the 5th. I should have printed this out so I don't keep going back and forth. October 28th, it's a lunar eclipse. So we'll have the moon again. But that means the sun will be on your Mars, basically, because your Mars is at 2, Pluto is at 6, the sun and moon are going to be at 5. So I usually use a 3-degree orb when we're talking about eclipses. 3 degrees is like the height of intensity. So you're right in that. So whatever is taking place, and it may not have been this noticeable. See, the way that I think about these things are like, what got initiated. You may not have the words for it, but there is a feeling, there's a dream, there's a general direction that life has been pulling you or leading you or dragging you in some sense when we're talking about with Mars. Oftentimes, but I think at your age and the phase of life that you're in, and the level of work that you do with your self development and um, being an individual and all of that, I think that probably you don't have to get pulled at this point. But then again, Pluto initiation, Pluto work. I mean, just that your Mars is on Pluto, this is like something that part of your masculine expression, that at some point you don't get pulled anymore because you're like, okay, here we go. That feeling comes up where it's like your insides are gonna come out through your mouth or down through the downward direction, and you're like, oh, okay. You know when it's time to surrender and go with the intensity. So whatever it is that started, and you don't have to know, you don't have to be like, oh, well, exactly, it's this thing and I have a year to complete it. It's not like that, but there is something that is going to be progressing through, uh usually we'll say 6 months. So usually it'll be by the time we get to the full moon. Let's see, that would be Scorpio lunar eclipse. So this is just okay. So that would normally, it would be May 5th. That would be the 6 month mark. And it would be 15 degrees, which just so happens to be on your ascendant. So there would be a completion kind of feeling at the full moon for whatever got initiated for your Mars and your Pluto. And it's not quite a completion because there will be another full moon in October at 5 degrees, which is going to still be working with that same storyline of what got initiated on the 25th of October, 2022. So just keep a journal, really like an eclipse journal or something that you can easily go back to what was going on around October. And then as you get through and get closer to May, the May eclipse, you can, see what is completing at that time. That's going to be at 15. So that's right on your ascendant. So whenever there's an eclipse right on the ascendant, so that means basically the sun will be on your ascendant. The moon will be at 15 degrees of Taurus. That is going to be the full moon, which will be a completion. It's happening on October 25th. Completion, kind of like the fruition of it, that would be the time that you would harvest whatever it is that you're working on, or that's being worked, that's being transformed for you. But then on the 15th, on what is that, May 5th, the your ascendant is activated. So whenever the ascendant is part of the eclipse, to me it feels like your sense of self is being eclipsed. Like there's something that comes through. Let me just talk about this for a second too. So eclipse, spirit and soul, the sun and the moon, the king and the queen, they have a meeting in some sort of way. At the solar eclipse, it's like they're kissing. They get together. They get to really be like sensually, physically close. And that is a time where whatever it is touching on our chart, it's like being animated with the soul and the spirit of the universe. So there is this soulful, because the moon is like all the ancestors, all the past, all the history of the entire world, of the whole universe, multiverse, whatever way you think of that, all times and spaces. And then the sun, which is right now, present moment, shining a light, the ego, individuality, linear thinking, the right now, they both come together, sun and moon. And so all of that wisdom of the past and knowledge of the present all come together and really activate a part of our chart. Then, when it's the full moon, that whole axis is being illuminated, and the spirit and soul are opening, like, about zero being the potentiality of all things held within empty space. So when soul and spirit, sun and moon are in opposition to each other, I see it as this elongation of all the wisdom of the ancestors and all times and spaces and emotional information, and the way that mythology can carry the storyline that hits your body in a specific way that awakens things. Like that's moon. And then the sun being that immediacy of what's joyful and present and blooming and arising, that all that solar energy, they spread to illuminate duality's unity. The zero is the perfect unity. They spread, stretching out to illuminate unity within duality of two things. So, what is really being emphasized for you right now is, who am I? Who are you? And in what ways can I dance in life with these two seemingly opposite things? So I want to just share with you something that has been, because I have this same, it's in the same first and seventh house for me, flip-flopped. But something that has been coming to me is like how much I will be different in the face of my lover. Be he will like inspire and bring out a side of my, which is what I love. Like, I do love him, but also just the of him brings me to full full time, like the fullest of what I can be in this moment. Like, if our human body is a, this is where I am, when I connect with him or I think about, or he'll say something to me, that I will rise to the top, highest peak of where my meanness, the edges of where I am. It fills me up and I feel so big and so, so that polarity between who am I and who are you has been, I'm feeling that, the fullness of what that means. And yes, it is triggered by the affection and attention of somebody else in that seventh house. But I realize that it's not him, that it's me, that I'm the one who is able to rise my energy. I'm noticing that I'm rising, and I notice my reaction and my responses, and that I'm choosing to do it. I'm choosing to feel that way. And see, he's not here. So I'm like, okay, so nothing is actually happening. He's not here. I'm not getting a touch. I'm not getting any things that I would have normally thought I needed. So that is revealing revealing to me the fullness of the first and seventh house polarity. So for you, you will just want to notice, like, who am I as I am rising into the mastery of being a Scorpio, the archetype of Scorpio, rising into these mysteries of sex, death, other people's money, emotional fluidity, emotional currency, creativity, depth of soil, and the depth of compost, the death of things that has to happen in order to make compost, that beautiful black pile that used to be food that now is going to be so wonderful to grow new seeds. Like, that compost grows seeds like no other. You probably have food growing in your compost because that soil is so dark and black and fertile. And then who are you? This You have Taurus over there, so you may be witnessing like, wow, he's so relaxed, he's so lazy. Taurus in the seventh house, we can view our partners as being lazy. And it's sometimes when you're like in a good, like, oh, I love how relaxed you are, but when you're in a bad mood, you're like, you're so lazy. We're just thinking it. Hopefully you don't say it out loud, because I feel like people with when they are being relaxing or lazy, they don't want to hear that they're lazy. It's like such an insult. Um, Not for everybody, but for you to be able to also realize, like, where can I be more lazy? Where can I on some more and be receptive to my own depth, the Scorpio? Where can I go sit down somewhere and be more receptive to these mysteries that I've put into motion when my hands were in the compost, or when after I've grown this beautiful mango tree or whatever it is. Mangoes kind of take a long time to fruit, but now can I sit back and enjoy the fruits of my deep exploration? Scorpio is water in the form of ice, and it has to do with traversing those deep waters and frozen emotions, frozen uh, currency, so sometimes in that frozen, deep, still water that we're able to touch it, go into it. And I'm always like, I'm not sure if we're supposed to melt that. Like, it's frozen for a reason, but also just like being able to touch it. There's a psychological component with Scorpio. So being able to touch that in a way that allows the resurrection. Taurus and Scorpio is so Scorpio is the death portion and Taurus is the new life portion. You will see that the is it Beltane? When we get into Taurus season, that we have Beltane, which is like this big, like I think of it as like an orgiastic, like party, drink alcohol. Hathor is the goddess. What is Hathor's real name? Het. Het Heru. That's Hathor. She's the goddess of beer and pleasure and beauty and love, which is a lot like Venus. And that celebration at Beltane, which is very, I think also Easter is around that time where we have like the fertility eggs that we're looking for. And um, so for you to be that full axis, the fullness of your first and seventh house. Okay, so we haven't even talked about this eclipse. So the eclipse that's happening has so much fullness because of what's been going on with the Venus story, Venus in the underworld, and that just happens to be so close to your ascendant. I'm going to, you know what I should do is just take a screenshot of this so I can keep them together and not have to travel between. So your ascendant is at 14, and then for some reason, I cannot remember where Venus is today. Let me just go back and have a peek. Okay, actual today. That's 17 November. 17 November. This is actually the 7th of November. Well, let's just pull up the 8th. Okay, so at the time of the eclipse, Venus is going to be at 20 degrees. Why did I do all that? I have the chart right here. My God, I'm so sorry. Okay, so wow. So the eclipse is basically, did you already know this when you asked me for a reading? Your ascendant is at 14 degrees and the eclipse is happening at 16 degrees. So basically, this is a full moon. So it is a completion of the eclipse 6 months ago. And that's the way these generally work. It's like when it was a solar or a new moon, that was the initiation, the beginning. And then when it gets to the full moon, that's going to be the completion of the previous 6 months. So there's something that is coming to fruition now in your sense of self, specifically coming to fruition of you being like realizing your power and specifically your sexuality, the power of your sexuality, that that energy get really turned on, and it's just you're like flooded with I get chills just thinking about it. When you're flooded with this powerful energy, and then you get to choose what you're going to do with it. That you can decide how you're going to move that energy in your body and how you're going to move your body in the world in relation to the rest of the plants and the people and things around you. That energy in your body when you're extremely furious and you're hot and you're angry, and that energy is coursing through you, and you get to choose what you're going to do with it. So this is the thing that's coming to me, is like realizing that you have ownership. Ownership equals responsibility of your energy. Now when I say know your power, that's what I'm talking about, is like knowing what to do emotional energy, whether it's anger, righteous anger, stupid anger, where you're just angry and you don't know, you know what I mean? Um, that's more like, I wouldn't say it's stupid. I would say it's, when you get angry, but it's really like you're validating your sense of self, you're validating your ego identity. You get mad because somebody was right and you're so mad because they were right, but you're like, oh well, you were right. That, so even that, all that emotional energy, all the whole spectrum of emotions that we have, that is your power. And something that I feel is going on with the news and all of that is where we get so emotionally involved in what's happening, and then we don't know how to use that power. So we basically are like being harvested for our emotional energy. So you feel a certain way, so you go look at Instagram, you find something, you buy it, or you're so sad, so you go look on Facebook and see if somebody liked your post, and then you buy something. Or like, you're like, oh, let me. So it's like constantly we're being harvested. We read this news, we get scared. I do it too. I read about the diesel. I'm like, oh my God, I better stock up on my food. So I go to like foodtolive.com and I get a whole shipment of food that is brought to my house. I maybe would I have done that if I didn't hear that we only had 20 days of diesel left, or whatever that news was. But I heard that and was like, oh, let me do all my shopping now so I can make sure I have everything here. So that's not this. Is it the same? I don't know. It might be the same, but what I'm talking about is like you feel something, so you go and you're like, maybe you don't buy something, but your energy, your time, and your attention gets sucked into something that is stealing your energy, essentially, because we're halfway not conscious about how much we're contributing to whatever that is, the emotion harvest that we are feeding. When we don't know our power, we unconsciously feed some other system with our emotions, when what we could be doing, which I think you do it with as a Scorpio rising, and this eclipse is really focusing on what is my power? How do I use my power? How am I rising into mastery as a Scorpio? What is my value? What is my worth? And how am I actualizing my value and my worth? And because the South node is so close to the sun on your ascendant, there can be these realizations that are coming out to draw out not only the toxins and the things that need to leave, but also draw out some more of your power that maybe you weren't aware of, that you maybe didn't see it as power. You didn't see, maybe you thought of it as a hindrance or something ugly or shameful or guilt. You feel guilt about something. The South Node is drawing those things out for you to be like, oh, I have no reason to feel guilty about this, or I have no reason to be ashamed of this. It's so hard though with those things, and that's why they're so amazing, because everybody has it, but everybody hasn't let it come out. Most I feel like the most of our energy goes toward holding it in. So the tension, oh, the tension of like holding back, holding the emotional energy back. Ugh, coming up. That with the sun being on your ascendant, that stuff is coming up. And what I call finding the gifts in the garbage with the south node and the sun, it is finding the gifts in the garbage. Mercury is right there also, like downloads. I don't really like the word, but that's exactly what it is. It's like when you just realize something and you're like, oh, you don't know where it came from. It might have fell from a book, and you opened the book and read a line and you're like, oh my gosh, it activates something in you. That's the south node, with Mercury, with the sun, that there's new information coming in that is informing the way you rise into mastery as a Scorpio rising. And then when we get to Venus, Venus is like hanging on a meat hook in our sky of awareness. We don't see Venus, and we know there's a distress happening, because Venus has been going through trials in relationship with other planets also. So Venus being at 20, your ascendant is at 14. So Venus had already passed over that area of your chart. There, that's interesting when I think about it. So Venus going through that death phase, passing over your ascendant, it can also, because whatever passes over, it like brings gifts of that, of the quality of what that planet represents and in the state that that planet is in, and in combustion with the sun, and having this is the phase of the underworld where Venus is not visible. The gifts that Venus brings to your ascendant have to do with releasing something that you thought was your value and your worth. Like, oh, I thought, well, I thought people were going to like me because I did X, Y, and Z. And then come to find out, actually, like, oh, no, that's not what it is at all. That was a side effect of the real thing that I am valuable for. A lot of this has been coming up for me personally around planting. And I said it today on the phone with my person that was just like, all these things I was learning, and I was like so focused. I'm still really focused on plants, but now I'm focusing more on the medicinal aspects of the plants, where of course I still love the whole permaculture gardening, working in the soil and finding out how to grow new things and finding out how to reuse water and all that stuff. But it was like, nobody cares about this. It's not valuable. No one paid for it. I put it on my scheduling lists for people who are local. When they book a massage, they could book me to come build them a food forest. Nobody ever booked it. Nobody cared. I was talking to him on the phone, was like, oh yeah. And he was like, that is so amazing that you can do that. That's like one of your that's like one of your best qualities. That's something that I'm so attracted to about you, is that you have this relationship with the earth. So now, that's me, because that's my first house. So for you, with your first house, a quality or a trait that you thought was meaningless, worthless, not, you didn't think it was important, that is actually more valuable than what you were thinking. So something like that can become with because of that transit with Venus there. Okay, so that's now a first and seventh house. So this eclipse is going to be perfectly aspecting. So I would also be looking at that seventh house again, because the moon is directly opposite your descendant and Uranus is there. So things can be changing unexpectedly and drastically in your relationships. And with Uranus, it's meant to bring freedom and change and uh, revolutionary innovation to how you see yourself in relationships, how you do your relationship, what is your relationship for, what is your role in the community, and like how do you want to be received by the community, and what do you want to receive from your community? How do you want to be received by your partner? And what do you want to be receiving from your partner? And because the North Node is there, there is this big push toward going for the biggest, like going for your destiny, the life purpose of what all highest expansion of relationships can be, bringing maximum freedom, maximum pleasure and enjoyment and luxury, stability, all of those Taurus things. There's like, because now the North Node, where the South Node draws something out, the North Node is like pushing you to go to the highest, pushing you to go toward what is the biggest expression that you can experience right now. So it has to be something that you know how they say that you can achieve it. It's like what you are currently aware of, which would be the best case scenario. Uranus and the moon and the North Node are like wanting to give you that. And so this eclipse, again, in 6 months, there will be, well, let's just go ahead and call it a whole year. There is going to be action happening for you in regards to your relationship. Okay, so I will go ahead and close there. Thank you so much for letting me read your chart. Please feel free to ask any questions and I will answer them ASAP, because this is what I'm doing tonight. So I'll send this to you now and I look forward to connecting with you soon.